Good day. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation on the Capital Fund Rule. My name is Jeff Riddell. I'm the Director of the Office of Capital Improvements, the office that administers the Capital Fund program. With me today are three of the people who have worked tirelessly to help make the Capital Fund Rule a reality.
I'm Virginia Mathis, the team leader for the Capital Fund.
I'm Leandria Campbell, a program analyst for the Capital Fund.
And I'm Lucy Blackburn with the Office of Revitalization.
Again, thank you each for being with us today. We and many others have been working on the creation of a Capital Fund Rule for literally the past 15 years, ever since the Capital Fund program was created with the passage of the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act back in 1998. Thanks are due to a great number of people who worked on this rule over an extended period of time, including many of those who are no longer in the department. I would especially like to recognize some of my predecessors in the Capital Fund who worked on this rule, as well as others within the Office of General Counsel and elsewhere. Let's first talk about what we're trying to accomplish. With the Capital Fund program, we primarily want to have a program that functions with transparency and accountability and effectiveness, while also meeting the statutory and regulatory needs of the program. What we believe we have with this Capital Fund Rule is a program function that gives a better understanding of the requirements and enables the funds to be used more effectively. We believe the rule will also enable both headquarters and HUD Field Office staff to more effectively and efficiently manage and monitor the program. At the same time, we believe that this rule will help direct more funds toward modernization, given the limited physical funds available in this current environment, and will also help achieve other departmental goals such as energy efficiency. The Capital Fund Rule in this final regulation combines and streamlines what had been separate development and modernization requirements located at different points within the Code of Federal Regulation. With the passage of this Capital Fund Rule, the regulations are combined into a single program at Part 905. In so doing, existing regulations for modernization currently found in 24 CFR Part 968, as well as mixed finance and development regulations in 24 CFR 941 will be eliminated. Prior to the passage of this rule, capital funds were, the Capital Fund program was operating under interim guidance in terms of notices and outdated guidebooks, such as the Comprehensive Grant Program Guidebook, which was issued pre-QARA. PHAs were required to look in different regulations and different statutes to determine program requirements. With this regulation, combined with a guidebook which is now under development to be completed this spring, both housing authorities and HUD offices and the general public will have a better understanding of what the requirements are and be able to implement the program more effectively. The program for today includes an overview of the rule and some of its benefits to PHAs. We will then review specific sections of the rule, and following that presentation, we will address a few of the questions which we have received. We will not be able to take live questions during this broadcast, but we have established a mailbox, which you will see on the screen later on at cfrule@hud.gov, to which you can submit questions either today and in the coming weeks. In the next few slides, I will go through an overview of some of the key provisions of the rule and its benefits to housing authorities. On this slide, we see first what some of the benefits are in terms of the submission requirements. With the passage of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, there were varying program requirements and simplified requirements for qualified housing authorities. The Capital Fund Rule places the submission requirements in one centralized location, and in so doing decouples the Capital Fund forms and submissions from the larger PHA agency plan submission. It allows housing authorities to submit the Capital Fund requirements along with their ACC amendment, and eliminates the need for multiple budgets while still enabling the PHA to only hold one hearing. The rule also has an additional benefit in that it provides more flexibility on the use of funds that are received either through demolition or disposition. A new category of funding, demolition, disposition, transitional funding, is created, which can be used more flexibly, including for modernization as well as development. At the same time, the more cumbersome separate grants for RHF, replacement housing factor funds, with separate use and reporting requirements are phased out. Eliminating or changing the eligibility from 10 years to 5 years also allows increased funding to go to PHAs generally. And more discussion on DDTF will be held later in this presentation. Another significant benefit of this rule to both PHAs and residents is that it targets more funds to maintaining the physical inventory. It does this in a couple of different ways. One, by reducing the allowable level for management improvements from 20% to 10% and phasing that requirement in over a period of time to give housing authorities the opportunity to adjust for those that had been spending at the higher end of the range. And it also clarifies the eligible and ineligible uses for management improvements. As indicated previously, the reduction in replacement housing factor funds also makes more modernization funding available to PHAs. An additional benefit of this rule is that it streamlines mixed finance requirements. This includes an opportunity that HUD has and is intending to exercise to limit the number of evidentially legal documents that are submitted to HUD as part of the mixed finance review. It also eliminates the requirement for a separate waiver for identity of interest approvals when there's a commonality of interest in the entity that also develops and will be the general manager of the project. This rule also expands the energy efficiency requirements and opportunities in a number of different ways. It provides an exception to total development cost, TDC, for energy conservation and efficiency measures. It also implements the use of Energy Star requirements in new development, and it provides for standardized energy code requirements, including those found in the International Energy Conservation Code, as well as ASHRAE requirements for high-rise development. With those comments, I will turn the program over to Virginia Mathis.
We're moving now from the overview discussion of the regulation to the section-by-section discussion. I'm going to discuss with you briefly Part 100 and Part 200. Part 100 of the regulation gives a general overview of the purpose and applicability of the regulation. Of course, the purpose is to provide, of the capital fund, is to provide financial assistance to housing authorities and RMCs so that they can make improvements on public housing. This rule applies to public housing authorities that are under the ACC. Two very important sections here. The statement of compliance. By executing the ACC amendment and by dispersing capital funds, the housing authority is certifying that it's going to comply with Part 905 as well as all other public housing requirements. That's later defined in this section. Public housing requirements generally covers not only the 1937 Act, this particular regulation 905, HUD notices, as well as other federal regulations. If a housing authority does not comply with the public housing requirements, HUD can institute sanctions, and those sanctions are described in the end of the rule in Part 800. PHAs are given an opportunity to appeal when they get the written finding. Another part of this section is 905-108. It's the section on definitions. Altogether, there are about 40 definitions in this section that apply generally throughout the rule. In the rule later, in Part 905-604, there's an additional section which has definitions. Those definitions predominantly apply to mixed finance. Even though there are about 40 definitions, I've pulled up for you about 5 of them I want you to look at. And as you can see, whenever we have a new requirement, we've put in bright red new so that you'll focus on those as we go through the slides. One of the definitions is capital fund program fee. It is a new definition. This is the fee that the PHA can charge to a capital fund grant to cover the costs of management, and those funds are then allowed to go to the COCC. Fungibility, another definition that you'll find in this section, which allows PHAs to substitute work items from among work items in their approved 5-year action plan. And they can do this using fungibility without prior HUD approval. The definition obligation. Obligation is a binding agreement for work and for financing that will result in outlays of capital funds either immediately or in the future. I want you to focus on the last part of this definition. Capital funds that are transferred to operations, which is BLI 1406, are obligated when they are budgeted and then drawn down. We're going to look at two more definitions. I referred to this one earlier, public housing requirements. This term is used throughout the reg to refer back to all the requirements that the PHA is responsible for following. And the definition of qualified PHAs. Qualified PHAs were established as a category in HERA, and this is public housing authorities that administer 550 or fewer units, and that's a combination of public housing units and Section 8 units. The PHA, to be qualified and to be able to have the abilities of a qualified PHA, cannot be troubled under FEMAP or under PHAs. So in summary, this section 905-100, a major part of it is the definitions found in 108, which I've listed some, but also again, it gives you a kind of a setting for the regulation as it relates to coverage, applicability, purpose as well. Part 200. Part 200 has three major sections. First, there's a discussion of eligible activities that can be completed, done with capital fund money. There's a section on ineligible activities. And then finally, there's a discussion about the reserve for emergencies and natural disasters. So generally, the eligible activities include modernization, development, and financing. There are about 18 separate activities that are described in this section. There's a brief description of each of them. Other activities that are mentioned include energy audits, demolition, financing. So there are a variety of items listed under here that you can look at. Two of the things that need to be remembered, that to be an eligible activity under capital fund, the activity has to be included in the 5-year action plan of the PHA that's been approved by HUD. Unless the activity is approved by HUD as an emergency or a disaster and given assistance under the reserve. Some of the eligible activities that you will find in 905-202 are costs that are not associated with the PHA's project or development. Also, costs that are covered under the operating program, except costs that are related to 905-314L. That refers to the PHA's ability to move, if they're large, up to 20%, and if you're small, up to 100%, if you meet certain criteria, to operations. The direct provision of social services, either by force account or contract labor, is not eligible under the capital fund, and duplication of costs that would be paid for through another method, including operating fund or another federal or non-federal source. You cannot use capital funds to duplicate funding. Management improvements is one of the many eligible activities listed in this section. I'm going to kind of give you an overview. Management improvements refers to non-capital activities that are needed to upgrade and improve the operation of the housing authority or the maintenance. They can be project-specific or they can be PHA-wide. They could be promoting energy conservation, assisting in sustaining the physical improvement, or correcting management deficiencies. The PHA needs to be able to demonstrate the linkage between the management improvement and the identified management deficiency. These improvements are funded throughout the time of the physical improvement, and there are some exceptions in the regulation where they can be funded for a longer period of time. Eligible management improvements, this is a list of a few of them that are identified in the regulation. Many of them relate to training of personnel, resident training, self-sufficiency, economic self-sufficiency for residents, some security, project security. When I'm speaking of security here, I'm speaking of equipment. These are some of the areas that are identified as eligible management activities in the regulation. The regulation also clarifies ineligible management improvements. For example, the costs of funding security guards or other ongoing services. And when I speak of the security guards, specifically the salaries and benefits for security guards. General remedial education, job counseling, job development, hiring of a resident coordinator, all are items that are identified explicitly as being ineligible capital fund expenses. Another portion of this part 200, is a discussion of emergency and natural disasters. You can see this is the definition of an emergency. An emergency is unforeseen, unpreventable event, or an occurrence that poses an imminent threat to the health and safety of residents, and it must be corrected in 1 year. The definition of disaster has changed from the previous rule. Recently, Section 9K of the 37 Act was repealed. So under capital fund, only non-presidentially disasters can be funded. So a little information about the reserve. It has been around for a long time. This past year in 2013, the reserve was about $18.9 million. It is congressionally mandated through our Appropriations Act. We fund approvable applications for disaster and emergency in the order that they are received. We also use this pot of money to fund safety and security grants, which we have done for the last several years. There was $3 million funded for safety and security grants. The department can ask the PHA to use its unobligated or a portion of its unobligated capital funds before being funded for an emergency or a natural disaster grant. The process for submission of an application, the PHA should send their request for either the emergency or a disaster, again, a non-presidentially declared disaster, to their local HUD Field Office. The field office will review the application and forward the application to headquarters for our review, along with a recommendation from the field office manager. In the case of a disaster where money is needed immediately, HUD will accept a preliminary application, and the requirements for a preliminary application for a disaster are less demanding, and funds can be sent to the Housing Authority much more quickly when it's needed. So a summary of the changes of this section: the eligible activities have been expanded with some new ones. Ineligible activities have been reviewed, clarified in some cases, and the reserve for emergencies and disasters is also discussed. An explanation of the change for the disaster grants only being non-presidentially declared disasters. However, you realize that FEMA will fund presidentially declared disasters for PHAs. Leandria Campbell is going to discuss section 300 and 400 of the reg.
Subpart C of the regulation describes general capital fund program requirements. Part 300 describes the new capital fund submission requirements. With the implementation of this regulation, the capital fund submission is decoupled from the annual PHA plan submission and will be submitted when the PHA submits its capital fund ACC amendment. The capital fund submission requirements will apply to both qualified and non-qualified PHAs, and all PHAs will be required to complete a comprehensive P&A. This slide further explains the capital fund submission being decoupled from the PHA plan. The capital fund submission is a separate requirement than the PHA plan submission described in Part 903 that is applicable to both qualified and non-qualified PHAs. Rather than submitting the requirement with the PHA plan, PHAs will submit it when they submit the capital fund ACC amendment, and as a result, will no longer have to submit both a preliminary budget and a final budget. Under the capital fund submission requirements, PHAs are required to hold a public hearing and a resident advisory board consultation, but this hearing can be combined with the hearing required under 903 for the PHA plan. Each PHA must submit a capital fund 5-year action plan. The 5-year action plan should contain a budget for each of the 5 years and all required certifications. The PHA is required to hold a public hearing and a resident advisory board consultation and must submit any comments received from these hearings. Each PHA must also maintain an updated performance and evaluation report on file, which can be requested by HUD at any time. Subpart C also contains some new provisions in design and construction. It standardizes the Energy Code by implementing the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code. This section also requires that all modernization projects be designed and constructed in compliance with cost-effective energy conservation measures identified in the PHA's most recent energy audit. Additionally, it states that PHAs must purchase Energy Star or Federal Energy Management Program designed products, unless purchasing these products is not cost-effective. 905-314 describes cost limits. This regulation provides a TDC limit exception for capital and management activities that promote energy conservation and efficiency. For non-asset management PHAs, administrative costs are limited to 10% of the annual capital fund grant. For PHAs under asset management, the capital fund program fee is limited to 10% of the annual capital fund grant. The administrative cost limits for development work with capital fund or RHF grants is 3% of the total project budget or up to 6% with HUD's approval. This table shows how the management improvement cost limit will be phased down from 20% to 10% over the next 5 years. In fiscal year 2014, PHAs will be limited to using 18% of the annual capital fund grant for management improvement costs. This limit will decrease by 2% each fiscal year and will be limited to 10% in fiscal year 2018 and after. A PHA may use capital funds for operating costs if it is included in its approved 5-year action plan. PHAs with 250 or more units may use up to 20% of the annual capital fund grant for operating costs. PHAs with less than 250 units that are not troubled and have met all significant capital needs, emergency needs, and debt service payments may use up to 100% of the annual capital fund grant for operating costs. PHAs with less than 250 units that are designated as trouble are limited to using up to 20% of the annual capital fund grant for operating costs. It's important to remember that capital funds that are transferred to operations are not considered obligated until the funds have been budgeted and drawn down by the PHA and LOCs. Once the funds have been transferred to operations, the PHA must follow the requirements of Part 990. These next two slides summarize the major changes in Subpart C of the rule. The first change is that the P&A is now required of all PHAs. Another change is that the capital fund submission is decoupled from the PHA plan. This section also implements the 2009 IECC and the requirement that PHAs purchase Energy Star products. Subpart C includes a TDC exception for activities that promote energy conservation. It allows PHAs to use up to 10% of the annual capital fund grant for administrative costs or for the capital fund program fee. And the last major change described in this section is the management improvements cost limit phase down from 20% to 10% of the annual capital fund grant. (905-400) describes the capital fund formula calculation. In this section of the regulation, it clarifies that reconfiguration or conversion of units causes the PHA's formula share to be calculated based on the unit count after the reconfiguration. This is the policy that HUD has consistently implemented, as it was never the intent of the formula calculation to fund the modernization needs of units that no longer exist. 905-400 also describes replacement housing factor funding, which provides up to 10 years of funding for units removed from inventory due to demolition or disposition prior to September 30th, 2013. This funding was given as a separate annual grant for 2 5-year increments. This funding was used for development of replacement housing. Part 400 implements demolition and disposition transitional funding, which will replace RHF. DDTF will provide 5 years of funding for units removed from a PHA's inventory due to demolition or disposition on or after October 1st, 2013. PHAs will automatically receive this funding unless they reject it in writing. Demolition disposition transitional funding will be included in the PHA's annual capital fund grant, and the PHA will be allowed to use this funding for any eligible activities under the capital fund program. This funding must be obligated and expended in accordance with the requirement of the capital fund grant in which the funding has been included. So PHAs will have 24 months to obligate 90% of the grant and 48 months to expend 100% of the grant. This table shows the major differences between RHF and DDTF. The first difference is that PHAs were allowed to accumulate RHF grants until they had adequate funding for development. Under DDTF, there is no accumulation of grants since it is included in the annual capital fund grant and not given as a separate grant. The next difference is in eligible activities for the funding. RHF funding could only be used to develop replacement units, while DDTF can be used for any eligible capital fund activities, including modernization. As mentioned before, RHF was given in a separate annual grant, and DDTF will be included in the annual capital fund grant. Finally, RHF provided up to 10 years of replacement funding, and DDTF will provide up to 5 years. There will be a smooth transition period for PHAs from RHF to DDTF that will allow PHAs currently receiving RHF to be funded for up to 10 years. PHAs that remove units from inventory on or after October 1st, 2013 will receive 5 years of DDTF and will not receive any RHF funding for those units. PHAs that received years 1 through 4 of a first increment RHF in fiscal year 2013 will receive RHF grants for the remaining years of the first increment. And if these PHAs are eligible for a second 5-year increment of RHF, they will receive 5 years of DDTF to replace 5 years of second increment RHF grants. PHAs that received years 6 through 9 of a second increment RHF grant in fiscal year 2013 will receive the remaining years of the second increment in RHF grants. The major changes in Subpart D, 905-400, included a clarification on reconfiguration, the creation of the demolition disposition transitional funding to replace RHF, and the RHF transition period to DDTF for PHAs currently receiving RHF grants. Now Lucy Blackburn will discuss Subpart D of the rule, which includes information on development and mixed finance.
Subpart F of the rule, which begins at 905-600, addresses the development of public housing. As Jeff mentioned earlier, all the various requirements which were previously located in separate regulations have now been consolidated into one place. This includes the regulations previously found in 24 CFR 941. Subpart F provides guidance on all aspects of public housing development, including methods of development, financing, HUD requirements, mixed finance development, the approval process, and the expenditure of funds. In other words, it provides everything you need to know before, during, and after development. In addition, the rule has provided HUD with the opportunity to streamline certain elements of the development process to make it easier to navigate. In the following slides, I'll provide an overview of the major provisions of the rule related to development and highlight the changes that have been made. Subpart F of the rule begins at 905-600. Here, the generally accepted methods of public housing development are discussed, and these include methods such as conventional development by a public housing authority, turnkey development using a developer, acquisition of existing structures, and mixed finance development. Regardless of the method of development, PHAs must now consult with residents who will be affected by a proposed development and solicit their input on the development. This must be done prior to a PHA submitting a development proposal to HUD for approval. The next section, Section 905-602, lays out the various HUD requirements that relate to development of all public housing, regardless of the method of development. One key requirement relates to what is called the Faircloth limit. A PHA may not use its capital funds to pay for development of public housing units that would result in an increase in the number of public housing units owned or operated by a PHA on October 1st, 1999. The rule clarifies that development of public housing units means not only constructing new units, but acquisition of existing units as well. Another important HUD requirement included in the rule is that each site to be newly acquired for construction or rehab of public housing units must be in compliance with site and neighborhood standards. The HUD Field Offices will continue to be responsible for this review. In addition, 905-602 includes the requirement that the cost of new construction cannot be higher than the cost of acquisition with or without rehab. This must be demonstrated by a PHA through either 1, doing an actual analysis that compares the cost of new construction to the cost of acquiring a similar unit, or 2, through provision of documentation that shows there is insufficient housing in the neighborhood available for acquisition. Lastly, the rule includes the very important provision that all development activities are subject to environmental regulations at 24 CFR Part 58 or Part 50. Regardless of the method of development, the field office will continue to do environmental compliance review. While subject to all the requirements applicable to conventional public housing development, mixed finance projects do have some other specific requirements. These requirements are included in 905-604. This section begins by giving a very clear definition of what mixed finance development is. Mixed finance projects are those where the public housing units being developed will be owned by an entity other than a PHA, including a PHA affiliate or instrumentality. On the other hand, if the units will be owned by a PHA, this is not mixed finance development, just conventional public housing development. All mixed finance projects will be processed at headquarters by the Office of Public Housing Investments. Field offices are responsible for conventional or non-mixed finance development projects. The rule has provided HUD the opportunity to streamline several provisions related to mixed finance development. For example, the rule now allows mixed finance projects that involve modernization of public housing units to maintain their existing DOFA dates as a matter of right without requesting special approval. Also, the approval process for a project with an identity of interest issue has been streamlined. An identity of interest issue is when the developer or owner of a project also wants to serve as the general contractor. While the rule still requires the same documentation be submitted to HUD, a waiver from the Assistant Secretary is no longer needed. The identity of interest can be approved as part of the development proposal approval process. 905-604 also includes the requirement that mixed finance projects meet what we call the pro rata test. To meet this test, the proportion of public housing funds contributed to a project cannot exceed the proportion of public housing units. The rule provides the following example of the pro rata test. If there are 120 units in a project and 50 are public housing, the public housing units are 42% of the total. This means that the amount of public housing funds contributed to the project cannot exceed 42% of the total project budget. The mixed finance requirements also include regulations related to Section 35H of the 1937 Housing Act, which have not previously been available. Section 35H allows owners of mixed finance projects to deviate from applicable public housing requirements regarding rents, income eligibility, and other areas of public housing management if there is a reduction in the provision of operating subsidy that negatively impacts the financial feasibility of the project. However, prior to implementing any deviations, PHAs must prepare and submit an alternative management plan to HUD headquarters for approval. The required elements of the alternative management plan are included in the rule, as is a discussion of HUD's review criteria. The plan must be updated and resubmitted to HUD annually. Prior to moving forward with development of public housing, PHAs must submit a development proposal to HUD for review and approval. A development proposal is required for all types of development, including mixed finance. There is no longer a separate mixed finance proposal. Field offices will review development proposals for conventional development, and headquarters will review development proposals related to mixed finance development. The specific elements of a development proposal are outlined in 905-606. These elements are the same for all types of development and include such things as project description, project financing, project schedule, budget, and TDC calculation. Previously, for mixed finance development, Copies of all evidentiary documents were required to be submitted to HUD for review prior to approval of a development proposal and then resubmitted after execution of the documents. This requirement has been streamlined. HUD will now require submission of only certain documents specifically related to the public housing units. The major ones are the regulatory and operating agreement, the declaration of restrictive covenants, the lease, survey and title policy, and the mixed finance ACC amendment. If a PHA wants to acquire vacant land for future public housing development, the PHA must submit an acquisition proposal to the field office for approval prior to acquisition. Specific elements of an acquisition proposal are included in 905-608. Once the PHA is ready to move forward with development, it must then submit a development proposal. Section 905-610 discusses HUD's review of development proposals. Important elements are: 1, whether the proposal is in compliance with all the applicable regulations; 2, whether or not sources and uses of funds are eligible and reasonable; 3, whether the financing is viable; and 4, whether a 10-year operating pro forma demonstrates feasibility. The rule also incorporates the requirement that a subsidy layering analysis be done to assure that the amount of HUD funding being provided to a project is not more than is necessary to make the project feasible. HUD headquarters will perform the subsidy layering analysis for all mixed finance projects. Mixed finance projects must also comply with HUD's cost control and safe harbor standards, which provide guidance as to the amount of fees that can be paid to project participants like the developer or the general contractor. After approval of a development or acquisition proposal, any material change must first be approved by HUD. Material change is defined as 1, a change in the number of public housing units; 2, a 10% change in bedroom size; 3, a 10% change in cost or financing; and 4, a change in the site. Finally, Section 905-612 discusses the actual disbursement of public housing funds for project development. The rule allows pre-development costs to be paid upfront, subject to certain provisions. Pre-development costs are defined as costs related to the preparation of a proposal, project soft costs, as well as demolition. Pre-development does not include site work, infrastructure, or other hard costs. For non-mixed finance projects, after a project has been included in a PHA's 5-year action plan and approved by the PHA board, a PHA may use up to 5% of the public housing funds it's committed to a project to pay for pre-development costs without HUD approval. This amount was previously only 3%. However, there has been no change in the provisions for mixed finance projects. No pre-development funds may be spent without HUD approval. So, to recap the major changes related to development found in the rule: 1, there's a clear definition of mixed finance. The development process has been streamlined related to identity of interest approval and related to documentation that needs to be submitted for mixed finance review. Procedures are provided related to approval to deviate from public housing requirements under Section 35H, and PHAs can now spend up to 5% of their funds on pre-development expense without HUD approval. That concludes the overview of the rule in Section 905-600, and I'm now going to turn it back to Virginia Mathis to discuss Section 800 of the rule.
Thank you. Section 800 of the rule brings us to conclusion. At the beginning, Part 100, we talked about the overview of the rule, the coverage, the applicability, the compliance requirement. Here in Part 800, we're talking about the requirements for HUD review of PHA performance. And there's a list of things that HUD will look at during at a minimum during a review of a PHA performance. Identified here are 3 of those things. For example, HUD will look to see how the PHA has carried out its activities under its Capital Fund 5-year action plan, and were those activities carried out in a timely manner, etc. Also, HUD can review how the PHA is reporting. Are they reporting accurately on their obligation and expenditure reports in locks, and are the reports done in a timely manner? Another thing that HUD could do at a minimum in a review is look at the accuracy of the PHA's report in PIC of its buildings and unit data, so that since this data is used in the calculation of the capital fund formula. Where a PHA is not in compliance with the public housing requirements that are identified, HUD has the option of imposing sanctions. And there are a variety of sanctions that are identified in 905-804. I do want to mention that sanctions that are associated with a failure to obligate and expend in a timely manner that relate to Section 9J of the Act, those sanctions are discussed thoroughly in 905-306, as well as a discussion of the opportunity for a PHA to request an extension where not on the obligation end date. Other sanctions are identified in 905-804. For example, failure to comply with public housing requirements could result in HUD issuing a corrective action order, require a PHA to reimburse HUD from non-HUD sources, a limit or withhold or terminate capital funding, or operating fund assistance. The list is longer than those identified. These are just examples of the type of sanctions that HUD can impose. If HUD elects to impose a sanction, HUD will notify the PHA in writing of the proposed action, and the PHA may appeal during a certain time period the sanction that is proposed. 905-800, the major changes are a description of those minimum performance review requirements for a PHA, and again, a list of the possible sanctions if a PHA fails to comply with public housing requirements. We have received several questions on the capital fund rule, and we'd like to give you a few Q's and A's so that you can see at this point answers to the most frequent questions that we've received so far. One of the questions is, when will the capital fund final rule be effective? And are all the provisions of the rule effective on that date? Generally speaking, this rule is effective on November 25th, 2013, 30 days after it was published in the Federal Register. There are some provisions that will be effective immediately on that date. For example, some of the things that Lucy described about the identity of interest, the TDC waivers for energy efficiency, the new alternative management plan, these provisions are effective immediately. PHAs may use those provisions. I do want to point out, however, that there are provisions in the rule that are clarifications of existing policy and procedures. Those items continue to be in effect. The examples include the ineligibility of salaries and benefits of security guards. Also, the limit on development, which we refer to frequently as the Faircloth Amendment. The limit on development, that is new construction and rehab. Those are existing requirements, and they continue to be in effect now. Another question that has been asked is, how does the rule change the submission of capital fund forms and information? And do the changes affect qualified PHAs as well as non-qualified PHAs? First of all, non-qualified PHAs no longer have to submit the capital fund forms and information along with their PHA plan. And the field offices will not be reviewing the capital fund forms at that time. In 2014, some new things will happen, however. When we give out the capital fund formula, PHAs will be required to use the new capital fund submission process described in the rule. Also, when we give out the formula, the new DDTF will be effective in 2014, and the transition, RHF transition, will be effective in 2014. Also, I want you to note that the limit on management improvements, the cost limit, will be 18% in 2014. Based on the clarification in 905-202 of the final rule, how will the FY 2013 PHA plan budgets be handled, specifically as it relates to the salaries for security guards? Salaries for security guards and the direct provision of social services remain ineligible activities. The annual statements for FY 2013 should be reviewed. If those annual statements include ineligible items, they should be removed from the budget, and the budget should be resubmitted to the field office. Eventually, the field office will take the revised budget and spread that in lots. This is to remind you, however, that large PHAs can transfer up to 20% of their capital fund budget to BLI 1406 for operations. When that money is transferred to operations and drawn down, the PHA can use those funds to fund things such as security guards, direct provision of social services.
Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. We hope it was helpful. I'd like to especially thank the people who have worked on the development of the capital fund rule over such an extended period of time, especially the participants in this panel, Virginia Mathis, Leandria Campbell, and Lucy Blackburn, for their extraordinary efforts. Most especially, we'd like to thank public housing authorities that are working so diligently on such an important mission in providing housing and other programs for the low-income families that we serve. We greatly appreciate and value your dedication and commitment to this important mission. As has been mentioned, we are sincerely interested in getting any feedback, in answering any questions that you may have, either today, over the coming days, or over the coming weeks. We encourage you to submit questions to the mailbox, which you've heard the address for, cfrule@hud.gov, and we will endeavor to answer those questions, and either through direct contact or posting them to our website. Again, thank you very much for your dedication to the program, for your attendance and participation today. We hope it was beneficial to you. Have a great day.